Rodents of Yore, written and narrated by Gavin Whitlock. Chapter 1. And so, Amir Komashi called away his faithful and began what was believed to be the end of the world, Master Hemtrenth said, continuing his lecture on the history of Rodentia, a history written 4,000 years before by the founding rodent of the Flowing Fist Monastery, Master Balta, who wrote the histories as dictated to him by the angel Ashtamak, an extension of God's will. But the men who refused to believe in the love of the Lord and therefore refused to believe in him simply continued the wars that destroyed the race. The master, knowing his histories by heart and having long since mastered the use of the celestial runes, used a runic page by simply running a finger over the runes and believing in the power that Emir Komashi was, and highlighted his storytelling with a light display that depicted the wars and the people that came before. It wasn't long before one group of men had created a powerful weapon to destroy their enemies, he said, causing a vision of a massive smoking bomb to appear in the small room, with ceilings barely high enough to hold his hulking 27-hand height, about 9 feet by man's measurements. This weapon was designed to kill all the men in that area, but it worked too well, and the smoke filled the world and destroyed not only the men, but also the creatures known as monkeys. Master Hemtrenth's lectures were enjoyable to watch, and the children always enjoyed the embellished stories. This method of teaching has proven to be very effective, and as such is used with every lesson that would be possible. But from the destruction, the Lord has seen fit to allow good to come. The Dents, now inhabiting this world known as Rodentia, were once lesser creatures, and went by different names. We Hydras, the large dent, said, pointing to himself, used to be known as capybara, while Muse dents were known as mice. Castors were beavers, Erythin were porcupines, Ratis the rats, Lupinol were rabbits, Geromeres were gophers, Scoridae were squirrels. As he spoke, he looked to the students of the respected families. And so, God had his new chosen that would be his believers. But things were different this time. This time, the enemy Satan. As he spoke this name, he caused a vision of a frightful demon with dark red skin and bat-like wings to appear surrounded by smoke. Has joined the world physically. And because of this, the Lord has given us a powerful boon, he stated as he gestured to the runes he was using to enhance his spelling. These runes were given to us for the protection of the ones we love and the ones he loves. For it is not his will that any would perish. He finished his lecture with the old text, reinforcing the old ways along with the new. That's all for today, young ones. Go enjoy the rest of the day. Don't forget, your reports on the long before are due in a 10-day. The assignment was given to test the knowledge and ability of the students to use the tools at their disposal, and as such, he hoped these acolytes would use the knowledge of the masters along with the extensive library to produce a most detailed report of the events that led to their existence. It was about mid-afternoon, and there was still much daytime. The days in the Everglades were long and hot, and most of the children would most likely be heading to the water to cool off, especially the Castor and Hydra students. This place of teaching was positioned in the northern part of the Gatortail Everglades, what was once called Florida by man, on a raised mound of earth that kept the monastery about 8 branches, 40 feet by man's reckoning, from the water during the dry season, and only 3 when the rains hit. Though the monastery was walled, it was not for fear of attack from any of the other dens. The purpose of the wall was simply to keep the gators from getting in and potentially eating the various dents who lived inside. Within these walls, a dent would find a number of buildings positioned along it, which would house the dents, students and masters alike, and a large courtyard headed by a 3-tiered structure used for teaching, preaching, eating, and studying. In the courtyard, each morning, a dent would see the martial teachings of the masters as they instructed the students in combat and the fighting arts. The study of martial arts was quite important at this monastery, but it was the teachings of the celestial runes that was paramount, and as such, no student could become a master without showing a knowledge and aptitude with the runes that meets certain criteria. The runes could only be mastered by having faith, not in the runes, but in the God that created them. Thus, a master can only be a master by showing faith in Emir Kom Ashi, Lord of all. Many came to learn the ways of the flowing fist simply for the power of the runes, but no soul can use the runes for power only. The runes were a show of faith from God, and as such, can only be accessed through faith from his followers. Master Hemtranth sat at his desk after his lesson, poring over some notes on a prophecy pertaining to one that would come to banish the evil from the hearts of the faithful. Upon the ears of the music a song, still and small, will fall, and joy will rise. Insubstantial will be grand, and small will rise above all. The north will come south, and the heavens will crash to the earth. But from the flames light and life will abound, and evil will be found gone from his hearts. The master read the verse aloud, trying to make sense of it, but the ways of Emir Komashi are not often to be understood by the lives of mortals. For nearly 100 seasons, this prophecy had been recited by the middle-aged Hyderus master, as he attempted to understand its meaning. They were coming close to the end of the 125th summer for it, and they still didn't understand any of it. In the book, it was said that the words of a prophecy were seldom understood until after the event had come to pass. Master Hemtranth prayed that would not be the case for this prophecy. For some reason, he believed that he would have a part in seeing its fruition. A sharp, continuous ringing from the warning bell interrupted the master's thoughts then. He quickly rose from his seat and rushed from his classroom, nearly hitting his head on the top of the doorframe on his way out. In the courtyard, a number of older students and masters were running to the complex entrance, with a look of worry on their faces. The warning bell was to be used for emergencies only, but it would not be the first time one of the acolytes, wanting to play a trick on the stuffy masters, had pulled the bell. Looking to the bell hanging from the mount on the wall, Master Hemtranth could see the student and could tell by the look of absolute terror that this was no prank. "Master George Ormond," the large master called to one of the other masters. The master was a female Skirridae. Her ears sported long tufts at the points, making her 12-hand height seem much taller, and her long bushy tail she wore in a braid close to the skin to allow for better movement during combat training. She wore the vestments of the flowing fist, loose-fitting linen and silk with orange as the primary color, and the sashes and highlights dyed sky blue. She kept her long brown head fur tied back in a ponytail. Her hands were hidden in her sleeves, together in front of her, as was her custom. "Do we know what this commotion is about?" You know as much as I do, my student," responded the master. Her stutter belied her intelligence and often caused her students to underestimate her. Master Hemtrenth was one such student. She glanced up at her underling then, to his disheveled garments. His sleeveless vestments were the opposite of hers, depicting their differing roles at the monastery. And they were very wrinkled. You should really set a better example for your trainees and take better care of yourself, she stated flatly. They were running side by side, and her overly quick movements could easily keep up with his giant loping strides. Oh, but if I did that, what would that leave you to pester me about? His joke brought a light-hearted smile to her face. It was true, she knew. He had been her best disciple, and without his few outward shortcomings, the master had aced his trials. He had been a master for 30 summers and held the same rank as her, but that would not stop her from seeing him as her student. The sound of a child's scream reminded them that there was an actual emergency and pulled them from their humorous chiding. They ran for the sound, which led them to the waterfront. One of the children was in trouble. A gigantic gator had apparently been hiding in the water near the swimming hole and was harrying the children at play. The behemoth was no less than 6 branches in length and had a mouth large enough to swallow Master Hemtrenth whole. The beast had a young Hyderus child by the leg and was attempting to open its mouth to consume its victim. The young trainee had enough wits about it to clamp its arms around the snout of the giant reptile, forcing the thing to keep its mouth shut. A number of the older acolytes started throwing rocks at the creature and subsequently caused it to lash out with its long tail, sporting a single pair of spikes at the tip, and slammed 2 of them into the side of the monastery over 7 branches away. Not too far away through the Everglades, the large ears of another heard the scream and ringing bell. Chade didn't know what the scream had come from, but he felt in his heart that he needed to help. The diminutive Dent positioned his pack securely on his back and scampered up the nearest tree. The small pack contained a number of contraptions that he had been working on, and though Chade didn't know if he would be able to make it to the troubled creature in time on foot, he believed he could do it with the light wing. To the highest branch he climbed, his tiny frame barely bending the branches. Even for a muse, he was small, no more than 6 hands, and because of this, he knew he had an advantage that most would overlook. He was light. Pulling a cord on his pack, Chade released a pair of lightweight and rigid fabric wings and jumped. He started to fall a bit, but quickly adjusted his pitch and corrected his course. In only a few seconds of gliding, he saw the source of the commotion. A gator had a child. Down he dove, removing a stone knife from its scabbard on a leather thong around his chest as he went. He didn't know how much damage his little knife would be able to do, but he had made the knife himself and knew it was sharper than any other knife he had ever seen. He needed to try. Chade hit the gator hard in the head, driving his knife into the monster's eye, along with half his arm. The gator thrashed violently, and off flew the tiny warrior, taking the eye with him as he was launched over the water. It was at this point, as he flew over the scene, that he noticed a number of dents coming to the aid of the young one. Master Hemtrenth saw the strange creature fall from the sky and attack the reptile, as did the rest of the gathered dents, and was amazed to witness the smallest muse they had ever seen launch itself back out of the water onto the back of the thrashing behemoth. His clothes were mostly made of various plants and leathers, and held together with either carved stones or wood as buckles. His grass skirt was held up with a wood-latched leather belt and a connecting leather thong reaching from the right hip to the left shoulder. The thong had attached to it a crude sheath, most likely designed for the knife held in the tiny rodent's hand. Chade landed on the gator's back and quickly put his tiny blade to work. He stabbed the giant creature, but the hide was simply too tough. The little knife only skipped off the reptile's scutes harmlessly. How was he supposed to do anything to save this young one? The muse racked his brain for any information that could help him. The only thing his tribe had taught him about gators was that they were dangerous, armored, and that he should run from them. He tried desperately to find a soft spot in the hide of this giant creature, to no avail. The beast shuddered suddenly, and Chade glanced up to see a large rodent blasting the huge gator in the side of the head with a knee, with enough force to down a fully grown oak tree. An older Skiridae followed the forceful Hydrus with a lightning-fast strike combo, each hand trailing blood on each strike. At first, Chade thought the blood to be that of the elderly Skiridae. But as he watched, he noticed the hands of this rodent sank into the hide of the behemoth up to the wrists. Her flat hand technique ignored the natural armor of the gator and caused gouts of dark crimson to pour from the dozens of wounds. The split second it took the observant muse to notice this exchange cost the dent dearly as the gator rolled suddenly. He was under the muddy water then, held in the silt by the weight of the great beast. As the creature fought, Chade was forced deeper into the mud. Chade could hold his breath for a long time and had once even won a competition with the adults in his tribe, but the weight of this behemoth was not likely going to be moved by these dents that had come to help. His helpless situation caused just a bit of despair to creep into the back of his mind. Never before had he found himself in such a predicament. How was he supposed to make it out of this alive? He thought back then about an incident the previous winter. He had, once again, found himself separated from the tribe, and for shelter from the incoming winter storm, decided to take refuge in a large and dry cave. What he didn't realize at the time was that he was not the only resident for the night, and a great grumbler was also attempting to shelter there. The creature, once known as a bear, had awoken from its winter-long slumber rather rudely by an explorative young muse lighting a torch and accidentally dropping it on the dozing beast upon realizing it was there. In that particular situation, the grumbler had attempted to crush the small rodent under paw, but Chade had stabbed his blade into the paw of the beast and ran from the cave, deciding to make a shelter in one of the snowdrifts under an evergreen tree. Chade remembered that time now and stabbed the gator in the side. The giant reptile lurched to the side just enough to free the muse's arms and legs, but still pinned his head. Another sharp stab and a drag through the more vulnerable belly scales caused the behemoth to withdraw from the pain, therefore freeing the rodent. He immediately launched himself to the surface and beyond, landing on the back of the monster again. The monks had been working the beast over during his short stint underwater. Child was no longer in the beast's mouth, and there was blood pouring from a score of new wounds on the creature's face, head, and neck. Chade ran the length of the beast to its head and jammed his small blade into the reptile's ear hole. The beast roared in pain, shaking its head and flinging Chade to fly a dozen branches along the shore, who watched the beast back into the water and away from danger, hitting the ground and sliding directly into a large boulder protruding from the mud, knocking the tiny muse unconscious. Master Hemtrenth watched in amazement as the tiny muse launched itself out of the water onto the back of the giant gator for a second time. The master was covered in the blood of the creature, and multiple times during the event he felt the unmistakable crunch of breaking bone under the heavy blows of his fist. One of which times caused the behemoth to release the child and focus more on the two masters fighting him so ferociously. Then, the little hero ran up the monster's body and stabbed it in the ear with his knife. This attack caused the gator to shake its head violently, launching the little dent up the shore and backing into the water, cowed and, hopefully, deterred from future attempts on the hunting location. Turning their attention to the child who the gator had attempted to eat, the masters took stock of the injury the child had received. The other children had made a defensive perimeter around their fallen friend, and the few closest to the downed child were looking inward. "Excuse me, students," Master Hemtrenth said, addressing the children. The children parted and allowed the two masters into the center of the ring. Two of the older students were huddled over the small Hyderus and applying pressure to a gruesome wound. The young Hyderus had his leg torn open and had lost a lot of blood. A major artery had been severed, and the young Dent was barely conscious. "We can't stop the bleeding, Master," one of the students helping said. The female caster's voice cracked with each syllable, and she was on the verge of tears. She and the young Hyderus, Claudius by name, had become close friends over the week she had spent mentoring him with his runic studies. "It will be all right, Can't. Please, allow Master Hemtrenth to handle it from here," Master Jormund bade, and allowed Master Hemtrenth through to the child. Without hesitation, the large master stopped the blood flow to the student's leg with his large hands and carried him into the temple and directly to the infirmary, where he would use the power of the Lord through the runes to heal the acolyte within minutes.
"Master Jormund, there was a lot of blood,"
said the second acolyte, a male junior nearing adulthood and thus nearing his master's trials.
"Are you sure Claudius is going to be alright? The teachings say that we can do anything through a miracle machine who strengthens us, but it also tells that we need to do all that is in our power so God can do all that is in his power."
You are correct, Pupil Granite, answered the elder. "And so we have, and so we will through prayer. As you can see, though," the master started gesturing to the small rodent lying quite still where he had fallen, "there are others in need of our assistance, and we should do just as much for them as we would for those in our order, if not more." The master and her students went to the prone form of Sade and gently carried him to the infirmary. There was blood streaking down his face from his ears, showing signs of a concussion, and the bruising on his torso indicated some broken ribs, but he was still breathing, and the Skiride master believed he would make a full recovery in a few months without the use of the runes. The recovery of the little mouseling could be sped up with the faith of the monks, but using the runes on an outsider was forbidden unless dire need arose. The rule was put in place to protect the temple from those who would try to possess the power through force, which was impossible. In the eyes of the Council of the Five Faithful, there simply was no point in chancing the destruction of a temple and all of its inhabitants just because a power-hungry overlord or some other greedy dent thought they could get ahead through force. Cantilever, or Cant to our friends, was waiting for Master Hemtrenth in the courtyard the next day. The master had been in the infirmary the entire night and most of the next morning, working with the runes to reform Claudius's leg. The process of reattaching muscles and veins through the use of the runes was long and tedious, though a much better option than having to amputate the child's leg and chance an infection. And Master Hemtrenth was exhausted, and Cant could see this fact plainly on the master's face when she stopped him on the steps out of the main building.
"Master, how is he?"
she asked with a quick straight-backed bow. The young caster did her best to seem tough to those around her, but in times like this, her truly caring nature often presented itself unabated by inhibitions. The towering master's shoulders were hunched, but he offered his student a kind-hearted smile as he answered her question. "Acolyte Claudius will live to run again." And he walked off to his chambers for some much-needed rest, dragging his feet all the way. The young caster's smile was short-lived as she walked away to find Granite. She couldn't let him see that she was happy that her annoying shadow would be able to join them again soon. The young Hyderus was assigned to her for mentorship, and ever since, the young one tailed her and Granite on every outing, often causing the trio to get caught doing things or going places they weren't supposed to. One time, the little rodent caused them to get caught getting into Master Particle's cheese cellar and accidentally destroying the shelves for the cheeses, ruining all of it in the process. The temple leader was very displeased by this and had even hired some builders from the nearby fortress city of Telhull, a joint city of Castor and Geomir, to overhaul the dormitories so that the entrances of the buildings were placed in the sleeping quarters of a rotating master's watchpost. The masters on watch each night locked the outermost door and kept the key in a compartment under their mattress. There was no more sneaking out for the students during the night. This did nothing for the young caster's mischief, though, and she and her cohorts could often be found, or not being found, as was the majority of the time, sneaking away to prank a master or scare some students. She had a different plan this day, though. "What took you so long?" The deep, stuffy voice of Granite scolded as Cant rounded the northwestern corner of the complex. "Sorry, me lord," she responded sarcastically. "The masters wanted me to know about the shadow, like I care." She rolled her eyes to emphasize the point, and nodded out to the swamp, motioning for Granite to follow. The proportionately older Geomir towed a boulder to one side and grabbed a haversack hidden beneath. His stout and muscular frame easily moved the roughly 200-pound stone from its nesting. He threw the pack over one shoulder, causing the metal objects to clang together noisily. "Keep those tools quiet," Camp breathed quietly. "If we get caught, there won't be any way for us to finish it." "It would be there already if I didn't have to wait for you. You know I can't swim," shot back her Geomir counterpart. Granite was roughly 12 hands tall, and his entire body was covered in large chiseled muscle. Though he was quite strong, all that muscle did not make swimming easy, and more often than not, the adolescent dent sank to the bottom without help. Of course, if he was close enough to the shore, he would simply walk out, but his dense body just wasn't made for swimming. "Oh, quit your belly aching," she responded sharply. "We'll get there with plenty of time to get some work done." And with that, she ran off toward the water's edge. She was taller than her friend, about 16 hands tall, and her long, muscular legs were designed for the water. Each foot sported tough webbing between her toes, and she was well versed in how to use them, both as aquatic propulsion and as deadly weapons when attacked. Cantilever was one spring Granite's junior, but their difference in heritage made her proportionately his senior in age group. She would be considered an adult by caster standards in the next winter, making her 35 winters old. Granite was only 7 springs old. What made Granite progress further in training was his willingness to do as he was told and learn new techniques almost immediately. He followed her away from the compound quickly, and he was forced to move his stubby little legs fast to keep up with her longer strides. After about a mile, she stopped and waited for her friend at the water's edge. They had been splashing through shallow mud for most of the last half mile, and though Cant was well versed in traveling through this land, her more stout compatriot was not, and the mud strewn about his fur, taking his bright light gray color and turning it dark brown, showed this fact clearly. She simply shook her head at him and gave a small snicker. "One of these days, we're going on an adventure where you're uncomfortable and I'm not. Then I will be the one laughing at you," the Geomir stated dryly. as he trudged his way over to his friend, panting all the way. "I would welcome the change," she stated, seeming to honestly think an adventure like that would be a good thing and therefore a welcome change indeed. "Come on, Stubby," she beckoned as she waded into the muddy water. He waded into the slow river with her, one of many lacing through the Everglades, and grabbed onto the back of her shirt with both hands as her strong legs and flipper-like feet took them to the other side of the floe where they had hidden a well-built wooden raft. This portion of the trip was always stressful for Granite, but Kant's speed in the water made the trip fast, and the flowing waters made the water too clear for the gators to wait in ambush. They had hidden the wood log raft in the roots of a mangrove tree to keep others from accidentally coming upon it and taking away their mode of transportation. The two friends dislodged the vessel, took up the paddles, and headed downstream. An hour after boarding the raft, they had come to their destination. On the northern side of the river stood a wooden castle on a grassy hill about 50 branches from the water's edge. The magnificent walled structure was decorated with hand carvings of the story of Rodentia in picture form, starting with the fall of man and progressing through the times of the Rodents all the way to the present according to the scriptures. In spots along the wall, stone had been placed to reinforce the fortitude of the wall. The outer bailey of the wall was 4 branches tall and positioned on the southern side of the 3-branch-high wall. Inside the wall was a modest 3-room castle, providing enough room for a grand hall, master sleeping chamber, and a kitchen. There was also a stable with enough space for several mounts, and a food and grain storage warehouse with enough space to store 6 months' worth of grains and meats. Kant had built this structure over the course of the previous 20 years and recently had recruited Granite to assist with the stonework. This was what they had come here for. Over the course of the next 13 hours, the two worked tirelessly, cutting and retrieving stones from a nearby quarry they had recently constructed, creating mortar, and Kant going so far as to build a wooden crane to lift and place the large square stones into place. By the end of the day, they had half of the 30-branch-long wall overlaid with stone, and would have kept going, but with night coming on, they were forced to stop until their next free day.